Welcome all. This is John Arnold, and we are back with another Watch This Space podcast. And to my left, you don't know that, but I think he's on my left, is Chris Fine, my longtime colleague. Hey, Chris.
Hi, John. Hi, everybody. Good to be back.
Yeah, we hope you've all had a nice restful break, and 2020 is here, and we are looking at not just a new year, but a new decade. So it's a good time to be trying a little bit of crystal balling and thinking about what's going to be coming in the year ahead. And as you know, we look at a lot of trends in the communications technology space and the broader kind of evolving digital workplace, where so many trends are kind of converging to I think reshape what we think of as work, what it is, how it gets done, and with that, how we communicate and share information and get things done, right, Chris?
That's right, John. I think these trends are going to continue, as we're going to talk about.
Yeah, so we did our last podcast on 2019, kind of some key takeaways. And if you haven't given that a listen, you might want to put this on pause and give that a listen so you'll know where we were coming from about the year and the decade we were exiting. And now we'll set the stage a bit for what we think are going to be the big things to watch for in 2020. So, Chris, we've been kind of, as we prepped for this call, we've kind of identified two big themes that we'll touch on today. And yes, more acronyms, but they're familiar ones. So first one being AI and the second being CX, those being artificial intelligence and CX being customer experience. So they're both related, or as AI seems to touch on everything these days. But we'll spend a few moments talking about what we're seeing in each area. Certainly, as the year starts on the early side, no big bangs yet, but they're coming. And I think it's important to keep a focus on what the market's going to start to look like as these trends start to, assert themselves in this year. But also, they're not new. We've been following these trends for a while, but we think that this year and coming decade is when they're really going to start becoming very mainstream and really starting to shape the potential we've always expected that was coming with these. So, Chris, I think let's look first at AI. And I know you spent a lot of time looking at systems design, systems integration as a way of applying this technology. And so there's a few things to unpack there. So let me turn off to you for a few minutes here and just start this thread going.
Well, thanks, John. And I agree with you. We have talked about AI before, and everybody probably sees all the news stories and everything else and knows that AI and its sort of junior cousin data science or probably more like a sibling, data science, have advanced to the point now where they are very, very widely available for a very low cost. And like any other thing in technology that's that important and potentially contributory to functionality, reduction of cost, et cetera, it's going to become more common. So if I think about 2020, I think that you're just going to see more and more everyday AI, that any system that's being designed or a product that's being deployed, the producers of it or creators of it, manufacturers are at least going to look at how AI can help in that product, like what role AI can play and how would they incorporate it, because the cost of doing so and the complexity of doing so is just not that high. And so if you think about all the things that we've seen in the past couple or 3 years start to incorporate some sort of AI functionality, everything from cars to your thermostat, to customer service, which you can talk about some more. I just think this is going to be part of the landscape. And I think that there are many ramifications for that, both positive and negative. But this is just going to be a technology that becomes part of everyday life. It's already happening, but it's just in 2020, I think you're going to see a real continuing spread of that into more and more areas of product and capability.
So is it too early to think about AI as a, table stakes, almost like a commodity, or is it still something that we view as almost like a value add to something?
I think it's going to be a little bit of both depending on the product category. So I'll give you an example of both. One example of what I think is going to become table stakes, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, is in, for example, the area of video cameras and particularly surveillance. I think that AI allows these systems to meet a need that the buyers of the systems have really had out there for years. I've talked about this, is the need to do what broadly you would call anomaly detection or looking for one particular thing. And then when you couple that with the potential for replacing things like badges with facial recognition and things like that, there's a big market out there. And now that it's becoming not so hard to do that, that's an area where I think it's going to become table space. You're just not going to end up buying what you might call a dumb surveillance system. Now, where you might think about the other side of this, where it's kind of a nice to have, at least for a while, but it's not fundamentally altering the function of the thing. It might be some sort of household appliance where, let's say, I'm not going to say a refrigerator, because as I was actually thinking about it, AI with refrigerators is already happening, and it's going to happen with things like understanding when you need ingredients and things like that. But let's say a range, a stove, right? You could definitely incorporate functionality that uses sensors to cook things better, to regulate heat, to be able to handle a wide range of cooking techniques without the chef really needing to know much and things like that. But I don't see that becoming common in every home yet. Now, having said that, I do think that all forms of home automation are going to be more and more AI driven. And I do think we're seeing that already in Cedia world, as we've talked about, and some of the other home tech. And I do think in office workplace tech, it's going to be more and more table stakes. So I guess on the whole, it's just going to be, it'll be put in some things where it's really not necessary because you can say that you have it. Cars is another one where it's really necessary. It does good things for cars. Not driverless, but even with drivers, it can increase safety, etc. But I think the most of what you see breaking out and really increasing in 2020 is going to be what I would have classified as becoming table stakes. Does that answer your question?
Well, yeah. I don't think we're yet at the point where, you wouldn't want to buy a product because it didn't have AI in it. It's almost like having that Intel Inside, stamp of approval, so to speak, that, I've got to have an AI enabled whatever. Could be a car, could be a PC, could be anything. And I'm just wondering, it's probably too soon for that because we still haven't been able to articulate the benefits of AI in meaningful ways that a lot of end buyers understand. And certainly in the enterprise, because the end users don't buy the products, they're just using them. For them, do they even have to know that it has AI? I mean, it's going to raise some ethical considerations too, that there might be layers of an enterprise software solution, for example, that has AI in it that is really only for IT and management to worry about, whereas, the workers, it may be transparent to them, but so there may be other layers of information that's being gathered or captured as we're using these applications that we may not even be aware of.
I agree, but I also think that there are so many different layers of enterprise technology where AI is already being applied and going to be applied more, that that's going to be table stakes too. For example, there are so many business processes where you could really apply some sort of reasoning to, or is it getting done right? To move things through a system, to do things like vendor questionnaires, just to pick one random thing. That if this gets cheap enough, then, why wouldn't you, right? Why wouldn't you make it smarter? Especially since you typically have all the data that you need to do it, because AI feeds on data. So I think there's a lot of enterprise layers where you're going to start seeing more and more of this. I actually think that the shortage, the constraining factor with AI, at least in 2020, is going to continue to be lack of expertise, like a shortage of people who really know about this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's going to be forever, because I think as more and more of these AI systems get trained by the experts on more and more things, then, the expertise required just to set it up is going to decrease. But I think especially from IT, today it's just really hard to find enough people to really understand this. So I think that will be a constraint, not forever, but certainly for the next 12 months.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you there. And, certainly in the academic world, big businesses have been poaching their data scientists for a long time now. And, it's a bit of a brain drain there, competition for the talent. And that's an ongoing issue, I know. And, that's a whole kind of side conversation about where that talent's going to come from. But yeah, I think all of this, ultimately comes down to trust, right? I mean, how effectively can these applications do what they're supposed to do? Because until they can deliver something as good as or better than what humans can bring, there's going to be some skepticism, right, about where the value truly lies, because AI, for the most part, still requires human interaction and supervision to kind of vet it. So we haven't come to the point where we, innately trust an AI-driven process end to end. There's not too much of that in the marketplace yet. But I know that's where it's going to be. That's where they want it to go. But it's going to be too early in 2020 to say. But certainly by the close of this decade, I think what we're talking about now will sound pretty quaint.
I agree. Sometimes it's a vast oversimplification, but some of what I think of sometimes is how cruise control developed in cars, where when, the fact that was going to take over the function of the accelerator and the brake in cars back when that was introduced, and all the various glitches that cruise control had and its limits, a lot of people had a lot of difficulty trusting it. Whereas today, it's like you may or may not prefer to drive with cruise control, but it's there. And if you turned it on, you'd believe it would work. So I think the next layer up is in every product category is similar to where cars are starting to get to now with AI, where you trust them, for example, to help you avoid collisions. You're still driving the car. It's not an autonomous car at this point, but the new systems that they have to help you avoid, like rear-ending somebody or, hitting something when you're parking, all these different things, you could actually get to a point where you could trust it. Even parking the car. If the system says it can park the car, a lot of people, there's a level of trust now that the people think this is great, because a lot of people have trouble parking cars as parallel parking. So I think if you think about that sort of metaphor and you think about enterprise systems, you look at where, with this level of AI, it's probably not going to be complete automatic pilot, but in some systems it may be, but it's probably going to be where it just makes something happen better that is difficult or expensive or low accuracy for humans to do. And I think most people are going to be fine with that. But as you say, what you have to do is watch where the border is and make sure as it gets into more and more things, that there's some kind of, administrative framework that keeps it from getting out of control.
Yeah. So all I can say to any of us listening, if you're especially on the younger side of the demographics, stick around in 10 years and come back and give this podcast a listen, because I think the things we're talking about today, where we are trying to understand where that border is, as you say, Chris, how far can we go trusting AI, and passing on or giving up certain tasks and functions that we do routinely ourselves. The car analogy is a very good one, I think, because it really, you can see where this is going. And I think that's the same pattern is going to follow for almost everything else we're doing right now. So oftentimes, as we see, the consumer world kind of leads where the enterprise world is going to go. So these examples of what we do in our day-to-day lives at home, I think are going to, carry over into the workplace too, with the way things get done there. And, you mentioned about identification, for example, to authenticate letting people inside buildings, into office spaces, etc. That's increasingly becoming, biometrically based, and AI is going to have a lot to do with that, with facial recognition, etc. And that's just going to become the norm. And I just think, again, what we're talking about now, if you listen to this podcast 10 years from now, you'll probably, be scratching your head like, what are these guys talking about? We got past this a long time ago, and that's going to happen, we know, but it's not because it's preordained. I mean, you have to have a lot of thought. You have to incrementally improve things along a certain path to get there, and that's where we are today.
I agree with you. I think it's going to be about, and I think your point about trust levels and the evolution of trust levels is a super important one, because that's going to drive a lot of adoption too. I guess if I were to throw out one piece of thought for our listeners on, going into 2020 on this topic, because we'll move on, is I would urge everybody, if a lot of our listeners already know something about this topic, but if you haven't really focused on AI, there's a whole bunch of decent documentaries out there. On TV, there was recently a very good one in the U.S. on the Frontline series on PBS. It was a multi-part, excellent documentary on AI, the good and the bad. I would just say everybody would want, in business certainly, would want to think about this topic, like learn something about it. It doesn't have to be the technology, but kind of the state of the state with it and where it's going and, how it's incorporated into more and more things. Because it's going to be a major part of the technology landscape. It already is, but it's going to be, it's going to be as common as, word processing within a few years, I think.
Yeah, for sure. So let's, we could be here all day on that one, and we'll revisit it as we go along, but let's shift gears a bit here and get on to the other two-letter acronym of CX, a little more of an awkward term, but it's quite, it's become quite a focus area, certainly in the customer care, contact center, customer service space. I use all those terms interchangeably, by the way, because that just shows you how messy this space has become. Like we say, in the early days, as you say, Chris, with the car, with starting with cruise control, a very simple set of controls, then it's morphed into becomes other things. And before you know it, the car is becoming something that humans have very little to do with it in their experience. And that's what's happening in this world of contact center these days. We've evolved quite a bit from having interactions with customers just being on the phone, right? Voice, real time, this kind of thing, where we now have this multi-channel environment where there are many ways to engage. They could be real time, they could be near real time. There's lots of modes out there that are very applicable, where the main issue is, a customer has a question or an issue, needs help. That's where the contact center comes into play. And here we are. Well, the contact center, as we know, has evolved much more from just being basically an operation where staff are there to help customers respond and help with their problems, to something that's much bigger now. So this is what gets us to this idea of customer experience. And most businesses have come to the realization that one of the best ways to compete and differentiate is on the service that you provide your customers, and more importantly, the kind of experiences you can create for them, because that's what makes them more loyal to your business, that more affinity to your brand, and will keep them in your stable for buying your products and services over time. So it's much more, it's shifting from more of a transactional model of you have a problem, I'll fix it, to a relationship-based environment where it's about how can we, the whole organization that's behind this brand, make your day better, make your experience better, give you more reason to keep using the product. How can we help you achieve whatever aspirations you have from using this product? So that elevates it to a whole other level of conversation and interaction that is a very big change from what the contact center has traditionally been. So there's been a real, sea change in how we approach customer service, And from that, the technologies that are being developed to provide that customer service and that CX that everyone is chasing these days. So yeah, Chris, I think, AI certainly has something to do with this, but it's another example of these technologies maturing to a point where now they're transformational, right? They're not just like a point solution for one thing, a phone for a voice conversation, a video camera for a video conferencing session, but it's tied to something bigger. And it's something I think we can all understand, but we haven't really had the tools until now to kind of make that real.
Well, I agree, John. As we've said in our prior podcasts, the world is shifting to experiential technology, and people are growing up used to it. And those of us who've had it long enough, whatever age we may be, just get used to things being more experiential and if more focused on what our experience is. And so what I think I think there's two ramifications to that. One is I think that has so become a part of product design, or it certainly should be, that bringing a new product to market in any area, product or service, without thinking about what the customer experience is a sure way not to succeed. It's almost becoming table stakes to have a good customer experience. It's funny, even things you see out there that are non-technological that historically were not great customer experiences, like a bar with velvet ropes and a big person there kind of letting people in or not. You see more now where they're not quite as fierce as they used to be because it drives people away. And they'll explain to people how you can get in or not, even down to that level. And, I think in technology, if you have something that's hard to use or not serviced well enough or not supported well enough, you're just operating at a much bigger disadvantage than you used to. And there's going to be some product or service that's going to come along in your space, and it's just going to pretty much eat your lunch. And that did not used to be the true. If we look at every area of IT that you and I look at, and all that we don't, I think you're seeing that. That's why there's a rebellion against clunky, in-house built applications, old stuff, that just wasn't that easy to use. People just don't have the patience for it and haven't been trained or conditioned in the technology that they use everywhere else to put up with it. And it also has a real impact on productivity and all the other aspects of it that we've talked about. But CX is becoming absolutely key. It already is, but I think it has come to dominate technology. CX, UX, whoever is experiencing or using the technology, that always is the winning solution, is to focus on that.
Yeah. And to illustrate that, there's a few dots I want to connect that I've touched on in my writing for different things, is this idea that the companies that seem to be breaking away and really doing well are companies that have already figured out how to deliver a great CX. And these are often the companies that are really leading the kind of the digital revolution. So in other words, companies that are cloud native, that are built entirely around delivering something that is defined by the end experience, as opposed to building a product that ships from a warehouse that you consume. So examples would be, even something like, for example, Peloton, which is actually having a bit of a retreat right now. But the point is, when you buy the exercise bike, there's lots of brands out there that do exercise bikes, but what you're really buying is a subscription to a service where that data that comes from your workout is pooled, with all the other users, and all of a sudden it creates a new community, and the ultimate value comes not from the machine itself and doing your workout, but the data that's attached to that. And all of a sudden, the business is not about the bikes. It's about the subscription and the experience that comes with that, and that sense of community that comes from all the other people who are trying to do the same thing. This is kind of a new way of approaching marketing and digital experiences that we didn't have before. And so, yes, the company is coming up against some pushback right now, which is, I think, warranted. But it's an example of companies that are created digital from the bottom up, and they already get it. And what's happening is there's a real shift happening from companies that are more traditional, and obviously some industries are more mature than others, in fact, they don't move so fast, like insurance, for example, but they're all rushing to adapt their service to try to mimic that digital experience. So companies that are old school, that are still stuck with a lot of legacy technology, they are moving quickly because they realize it's hurting them. They're losing business because they can't deliver that kind of experience. So they're looking to what the Netflixes of the world, the real digital leaders are able to do because they're driven by data, right? These companies have embraced the cloud. They've certainly embraced AI, Amazon, these kind of companies, and they've become the real masters of creating and delivering these digital experiences. And this is one of the reasons why some of these companies we see in the market are growing so quickly. So another example is Wayfair for furniture, or Carvana. They're creating new experiences for purchasing products that were normally always done in person in a store, right? You always go to a car dealership to buy a car. You always go to a showroom to buy furniture and see the product. But they're creating digital experiences for the same thing that seem to be working and attracting a lot of business. So these companies are kind of using this as a growth engine by delivering a superior digital consumer experience, customer experience, CX, UX. That's what's driving the growth of the business. The products themselves are almost secondary. And this convenience factor, this sense of customizing an experience, this is what consumers are looking for. So the companies that deliver that are turning into big winners. And there's going to be this gap of winners and losers that we're going to see over the next few years that are being defined more so by this and how they're harnessing this technology than the actual quality of the products that are being bought and sold.
I agree with you, and I think that one of the things I hear you saying is that, what used to be called premium level CX, sort of like the business class on the, flying's a bad example. We could stay away from that one, but let's just say the business class of whatever, or the first class of whatever, which used to be very much on the high end. The expectations are now, in terms of customer experience, moving down the chain because there are so many opportunities to take various types of former models of customer experience and make them better. So your Carvana model is your example is perfect, right? Because yes, you used to buy cars at car dealers, but a lot of people don't like that experience. And so in most areas of interaction, there's a way to improve it. And so that's one of the things that's driving this wave of next generation fintech companies. Just to pick another one, we could pick any number of markets where a lot of them are about taking some experience in the current banking and financial system that's terrible and just making it better. And you can do that outside the system of entrenched players. And so I agree with you, you're going to look at that in every industry, and the winners will be determined partly by how effectively they make that happen.
Yeah, and it comes back to the technology, which is cool if you're in that space. So, okay, we're running up on some time here, Chris, but we did want to talk a little bit about cybersecurity because it's a natural, it's very connected to what we're talking about here, because where there's growth, you're going to attract good people, but you're also going to attract those who want to take advantage of people who aren't so quick. So we've both been seeing this and talking about it for quite some time. So what's your outlook there on 2020?
I think that the threats and attacks are going to just continue to become more common. But I think all the technology trends that we've talked about, and CX is part of this too, although we don't have a ton of time to go into it now, the new technologies will be applied successfully in many cases to helping reduce the risk or respond better. But I think that if if there's something that's going to be more of a threat, it's going to be cyber attacks, and both micro and macro scale. And organizations of all kinds are just going to have to put this front and center and try to apply better tools and processes and training around it. Everything from individual phishing up to, a real cyber attack through an open door we recently heard about some problems with Ring, indoor cameras. As we've said before, if you're going to outfit your house or your office with essentially cameras and microphones and a bunch of other IoT type or, smart mechanisms, you have to think about security. And so, I think that's another theme that I know I'm going to focus on this year, and I think everybody should think about.
Yeah, definitely with you there, Chris. Again, these trends that we're looking at are very not just technology driven, but I hate to use this old term, but high technology driven, right? We're not, the kind of things that AI is doing is very transformational. It may take some time to get there, but this isn't about making incremental changes in how we do things. This is almost like reinventing the way we do things because technology has reached a certain level of proficiency and acceptability that it's a much bigger story. And with that, the stakes get higher for security. No doubt we're going to see more of that. Here in Ontario recently, actually a good example, a company called Life Labs, which does a lot of testing for, blood work and all that kind of stuff that people go to. They had a security breach and 15 million healthcare records were exposed. So the scale, when it gets to be that big, you can shut down entire industries. You talk about cyber attacks on cities, urban infrastructure. All of a sudden, these soft targets can become really, really big problems when they come in. And it's probably just as much effort to do that as it is to go after individuals. So the targets become bigger and the consequences become much, much greater, right?
Yes, and the number of bad actors becomes greater too. It's everything from individuals up to nation states who are, using these techniques. And also, just like we were saying, AI is becoming more and more open source. It's going to be more out there. It's more widely available. All the tools and data necessary to do the hacking or break-ins or techniques of cyber attacks is just widely out there. So people, everybody, you watch the news every night and they're always getting cautioned about passwords and things. But I think the technology on the attack side is definitely getting more broad and sophisticated. So what I'm hoping is that the technology on the defense side also becomes better. And some of these trends that we've talked about, I think will help it, but it's going to need to be applied to the problem.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, I don't want to be leaving us on a gloomy note there, but it's reality too, right? I mean, technology is, cuts both ways for good and bad, and there's no getting around it. It's all here, and we are not going back to typewriters and writing with pencils. So this is where it's at, and got a lot to look forward to, though. So, Chris, 2020 is here, and we got a lot to follow, and I think we'll just keep this thread going with our next podcast.
That's great, John. Maybe we should have just done them in different order. Maybe we should have done CX last, because that's largely a positive thing. But hopefully the listeners will bear with us.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So on that note, let's wrap up and thank everyone for listening. So this has been another edition of Watch This Space, our podcast here with myself, John Arnold, and Chris Fine. Chris, let's take them out.
Great. Happy New Year. And we hope everybody had a good holiday season, and the new year takes off on a positive note, and we'll be back next month. Thanks, John, always for having me on the show. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
Okay, we shall be back. Over and out for now.